Sarah.
Melissa.
What are we reading today?
We are reading Hiddensee, A Tale of the Once and Future Nutcracker.
I can't wait to hear about it. Sarah, we're making our way through the holiday season. Here we are in mid-December. What are you doing to get in the mood?
Well, I feel proud of myself in one sense because we have our tree, we have our decorations, so that's good. I'm feeling confident about my Christmas game in terms of at least how it looks at my house and how my tree looks and all of that.
The veneers of Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. The facade of Christmas is intact.
So tree is up. Do you do artificial? Do you do farm fresh? What's your approach?
Farm fresh all the way. Yeah, we've been going to this same farm for the last couple of years because I don't know about, are you farm fresh or are you artificial?
I hate to admit that we are artificial. Yeah, I'm guilty of that. I wish we were farm fresh, but not at the moment.
Well, yeah, we're definitely farm fresh. Like I grew up with like a real tree and Josh did too. And we've got like relatively high ceilings in our living room. So we just try to go for like a nice tall one. So yeah, same farm last couple of years. It's called Pulpit Rock, which is kind of a cool name for a Christmas tree farm. It was an adventure going with little William, my son, who's 4.
Did you give him an axe? Was he able to make any incisions on said tree? He would love that. My knowledge of William.
Oh my God! That's the stuff that nightmares are made of. At least my nightmares. But yeah, we had a saw that we were supplied with by the Christmas tree farm, and so Josh did work with William a little and like have him practice sawing on like the stakes that they use to kind of mark out plots and stuff. So that was as far as it went. Josh did the actual sawing of the tree and no chainsaws or anything like that. But one thing that like cracked me up when we were at this Christmas tree farm, there's a lot of guys working there. And there was one guy in particular that helped us with our tree. He put it on the back of like a small kind of, gator-esque, like all-terrain type vehicle and a little trailer. But he looked like straight up out of a Hallmark movie. And then when we got to where they kind of bag the trees up and we pay, there was like at least 2 more guys. Like they were ruggedly handsome with like stubble, like all wearing different types of flannel shirts. And and they all look like they were in their like maybe I'd say like maybe like late 20s to early 30s. And I was like, they totally could film and like build some sort of a Hallmark movie around this particular Christmas tree farm.
Do you think that they were actually just like unemployed actors? And like really, if they were filming the Hallmark movies, they would have done that filming in like April, May, so that these movies would be ready to go for December. So maybe like it's the same guys, and that's how they stay year-round employed and then it's also like method acting.
We have had some Hallmark channel movies, Christmas movies filmed like in our community. There was one, I think it was a couple of years ago. Could I tell you the title? No, because as a rule, I am not a Hallmark channel movie enthusiast, although I pass no judgment on anyone who really gets their rocks off watching that. But yeah, these guys could have been extras and they thought, you know what? I want to live the Hallmark movie life and I'm going to move to Northeast Connecticut and I'm going to work at a Christmas tree farm and hope that a big city gal comes with her aging parents and love blooms.
So you're not a Hallmark movie type enthusiast necessarily. So what are your sort of tendencies in terms of what do you consume to really like fill yourself with Yuletide?
Yeah, very good question, because as we were brainstorming on our little preview episodes, our holiday preview episodes, and you obviously had a book in mind right away, one that I know you've since read for like a 3rd time at this point, and is going to be part of your holiday traditions. And it made me think like, I don't necessarily have books that I associate with the holiday season that I kind of come back to year after year. I mean, obviously, I have a son, and we're reading some like How the Grinch Stole Christmas and The Night Before Christmas and some of those books. But it was a challenge because I thought, okay, if there's one that I haven't read previously that really puts me in the Christmas frame of mind, what could I draw upon? What's my affiliation with the holidays? What do I do? And I thought, well, a lot of the books that were out there are very much so in the kind of Hallmark kind of channel type, romance, like somebody coming home unwillingly and then finding love and all of that. And that was not what I wanted to read. And it made me go back to, okay, well, what have I consumed? And for me, it's been film, like stop motion in particular. Everybody should be familiar with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and, like the Island of Misfit Toys and, Frosty. Those were all Rankin-Bass productions. So Rankin and Bass, I think they were an active production company that produced children's entertainment and films from, I would say, like late 60s all the way through like the 90s. And so Rudolph being one of those stop motion films, Frosty the Snowman being one of those cartoon films. But there was one that I feel like is super obscure that was a favorite of mine, and it's called The Nutcracker Fantasy, and it's a stop motion film. Some famous people actually did the voices. So Melissa Gilbert, who was
Little House on the Prairie.
Little House on the Prairie.
I know all the famous Melissas.
Of course you do. Oh, as you should. And then Christopher Lee, the late great Christopher Lee, was in this. He did voice work for the film. He played Uncle Drosselmeyer. She was the voice of Clara, and it's just really like a fever dream, like phantasmagoric kind of film. And I have since watched it as an adult. I used to watch it every Christmas, and it is like, whoa! It explains a lot about me. I'm really a Rankin and Bass production myself, apparently. Between that film and some of the other ones that they've produced, that are like you watch them and you're like, oh, this is a product of the 80s and was not really made for children. But I watched it as like a 6-year-old. That kind of movie, yeah.
There was more money to be made by marketing it to children at that time, I guess.
Like a lot of those films have a lot of dark, frankly, scary elements to them. And I remember being afraid watching certain scenes from these films and the Nutcracker Fantasy in particular, but loved it and still love it. I watched it a couple of years ago. My husband bought me the DVD of this Nutcracker Fantasy movie, and I was like, still a banger, man. Like, I still love it. Yeah.
It's funny about this, like how you said I liked being scared, because I have been noticing in a lot of the stuff I've been reading, like related to Christmas this year, there's a lot of this whole like tales of the glories and scary ghost stories. Like, I think telling scary stories was much more a part of Christmas tradition, say 100, 200 years ago. And we've kind of let go of that for all of the holly jolly stuff. But we were reading as a family the Christmas Carol, the Dickens Christmas Carol. And obviously the ghosts, like past, present, future, that kind of thing. And then much like you, was not into the whole Christmas romance thing, which, like, what an industry, like what a powerhouse that has become. Any of the Christmas sections of bookstores are just like puns, like sexual innuendo titles.
Yeah.
And they're selling like hotcakes. And I just wasn't having it. That was not what I wanted. And I was kind of chasing the dragon of small things like these because I loved it so much. And so in doing so, I ended up getting like murder mysteries. I was like, I would rather hear about people killing each other at Christmas than, making out on tree farms. But yeah, and they all open with these like, epilogue or epigraph. I always get that messed up, but
I feel like, we should know this.
We really should.
Oh God.
No, I'll just say it with confidence and then it'll be right. The epilogue, which it certainly is, always had these like ghost related statements from previous like Christmas books. So part of your journey was reflecting on your connection to that Nutcracker story, and you found Hiddensee.
That's right. So the Nutcracker led me down the path to find Hiddensee because I what I did is I kind of scoured a lot of like top 50, top 20, top 10 Christmas books. My particular Google search was like Christmas books that are not romance.
Make me scared.
And so I saw this one and I had recognized the name of the author, Gregory Maguire, and many people would know him mostly through his kind of take on the Wizard of Oz story, which he wrote in the book Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, which was published in 1995 and ended up spawning a bunch of kind of sequels. And then, of course, ended up being the basis for Wicked, the musical, which, as we all know, has hit the stratosphere. And so this Gregory Maguire, he's really fascinated by fairy tales because a lot of his books end up being kind of a fairy tale turned inside out, or a fairy tale expanded upon, or moved into a different time period. I just saw one that was published in 2020, which I saw after I had read Hiddensee, and it's called A Wild Winter Swan. And I believe that that is actually based off of a folk tale that was like a Scandinavian folk tale. So it's really, I guess, a fascination of his and something that's a passion of his. And so this particular book, which is called Hiddensee, A Tale of the Once and Future Nutcracker, is his take on the Nutcracker, or I should really say his take on a particular character from the Nutcracker, because what I will say about this book is if you're looking for Christmas, don't necessarily read this book, because Christmas only takes up about 20 pages of a almost 300-page book. And it's all at the end. I mean, I'd say it kind of builds up to it. And so for me, I started reading this book in November before I had was really getting myself into the Christmas spirit. And by the time I finished the book, our Christmas tree was up. So, I mean, I guess it kind of like was on pace with my own kind of, I guess, entry into Christmas for this year. But it really isn't about the Nutcracker that we all know. It's really the backstory of one of the characters.
Part of the model that we're going for here is that I have not read this book. So you are meant to completely just elucidate me, illuminate me on this book. So, give me a snapshot of what's going on in Hiddensee.
Prepare to be illuminated, Melissa. All right. Hiddensee, A Tale of the Once and Future Nutcracker, is a 2017 novel by Gregory Maguire that explores the life and adventures of Dirk Drosselmeyer, the mysterious one-eyed toy maker and creator of the eponymous Nutcracker, made famous by both E.T.A. Hoffmann's novella, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, and Tchaikovsky's ballet, The Nutcracker. Hiddensee is a book fascinated by folk tales, fairy tales, and myth. In fact, Dirk's early years read as if he were a character straight out of the Brothers Grimm. Maguire introduces us to Dirk as a foundling in the Black Forest of early 19th century Germany, living with a nameless older couple in their isolated cottage. At age 8, Dirk's life is forever changed by a fantastical experience in the forest that costs him an eye, but gives him a second chance at life. He sets out from the Black Forest with only a carving knife and a wooden walking staff, both which will figure prominently throughout Dirk's adventures. Once out of the woods, he meets an ever-evolving cast of characters, including a humble pastor who gives Dirk the last name of Drosselmeyer, a wealthy student who introduces Dirk to the power of music and seduces him with it, and a sleepwalking Persian woman who fruitlessly searches for the lost garden of her childhood. Every person and experience Dirk encounters helps shape him into the man he is destined to become. Divided into 3 sections, Hiddensee sees Dirk age from a young boy to an old man. By the time Dirk and the reader arrive at that fateful Christmas Eve night, when Dirk's Nutcracker is gifted to his young goddaughter, we can finally see the path of breadcrumbs Maguire has left for us along the entirety of the story. Ultimately, Hiddensee, A Tale of the Once and Future Nutcracker, is a novel about lost childhoods and the power of myth, both literal and figurative. So there you go. That's it in a nutshell. No pun intended.
Ooh, nicely done. Nicely
Yeah.
done. It sounds like a bit of a behemoth. I mean, like this long period of time,
Mm.
as you put it, quite a cast of characters as well. Did you feel like it was a bit too much did you bite off a little bit too much to chew here?
Uh, Certainly, after I, kind of got into it for a little bit, I was like, okay, like this is a journey we're going on with this book. But I liked it, and I did think, at points, because there was nothing Christmassy really about it at all, that I was like, "Ooh, am I gonna have to read something else to really get get us through and get us into this kind of Christmas frame of mind with another choice maybe?" But it really got me thinking about how Christmas is it's all about childhood, really. I mean, at least our modern Christmas for sure. We're thinking about our own childhoods and how things have changed, especially I think after you've had your own children and you're trying to create this magical experience for them, and how they experience Christmas now will not be how they experience it later, and how you can kind of vicariously live through a child's eyes and the wonder that they experience and the excitement that they have around Christmas. But childhood really is like this magical little kingdom that you inhabit for a period of time. And then once you kind of walk out those gates into the forest, there's no going back, really, not in
Mm.
any kind of real sense. And so that's what I kept thinking of as I was reading it. I think, that was part of what Maguire was doing, or at least in my opinion, from, and I have a bunch of kind of excerpts that I'll kind of share throughout our conversation. But that's really kind of a focal point of the book is it's something that can be lost. So yeah, it was a bit of a behemoth, and the way that Maguire writes too is very kind of flowery,
Mm.
effusive. I don't know. That may not be the right term, but it actually takes, like, I feel like, a little bit more work to read than maybe
Have you
some other books.
have you got a passage there that you think like maybe either the sort of childhood theme you were talking about or even that
Yeah.
sort of like flowery type of writing style?
To kind of just I talked about how we once Dirk, and excuse me, but the only other person I can think of who's named Dirk is Dirk Diggler from Boogie Nights. And it's a real chore to, constantly be battling thoughts of Dirk Diggler when you're trying to think about Dirk Drosselmeyer. So I'll just put that one out there. But in any case, Dirk's living in the forest. He's living with this old man and old woman who literally, that's what he refers to them on. He does not know their names. He ends up having this like crazy experience and loses an eye, and ends up, it's impossible for him to continue living in this forest with this couple, essentially. And this is a mild spoiler alert, but it's so early in the book that, like, I don't feel like I'm giving that much away, and it's so on par with like a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. Like, basically, the old man and old woman, once he's gotten to this age 8, he was a foundling, supposedly, like, not their kid. It's just some baby that they found in the woods that had been abandoned, and I guess they didn't mind taking care of him at first, but then he became a burden. So they're like, okay, you got to go. We're going to murder you. And so essentially, the reason why, like, he ends up having this fantastical experience is because the old man takes him out to the forest and is going to kill him. And then there ends up being an accident. And anyway, he survives and makes it back to this cottage, but they're already arguing, like, you were supposed to kill him. Like, what are we going to do with him now? And he's like, I gotta blow this joint. Like, this is not gonna work for me. So he leaves. So he stumbles out of the Black Forest and he finds this really small community, and he's taken in by this pastor. And he has no last name. And so it's this pastor that gives him Drosselmeyer. And one of the things I will just say about this book is I feel like every mention of a certain type of animal or tree is on purpose and is something that you should actually, like, keep in mind and maybe, like, look up. It helped me. I actually did, like, this, like, wild rabbit hole, like, kind of search of, like, everybody's name. What does this name mean? Dirk actually means the people's ruler, by the way, in case you were wondering.
And that would
Or
also apply to Dirk Diggler then too, I guess.
the people's ruler. Anyway, but it's also Scottish for a small, sharp knife, which, as I mentioned, is one of the two items that he brings with him when he leaves the Black Forest. And it does figure prominently, like I said. Drosselmeyer, it has a bunch of different meanings. Throttle, to choke, but it also means the word thrush, the bird, a thrush bird, which that has, it's like a thrush kind of follows him throughout the book. There's all these different scenes where like a thrush is just like hanging out, watching him, singing to him, talking to him. So this pastor gives him this last name of Drosselmeyer and then kind of sends him on a little bit of a quest that brings him to meet all these other casts of characters that he comes upon. And so he ends up going to like a wealthy family's home because he had to bring a message from this pastor to, like, I guess, the bishop. And the bishop's gone and he leaves a message and he doesn't want to go back without a response to the message. And so he ends up just kind of like hanging out. He basically gets a job for this wealthy family. And that's how he meets this guy, Felix. Felix is friends. He's a school friend of one of the wealthy family's children. And he's just kind of hanging out. They're all there for the summer, just kind of chilling out, enjoying their wealth. And then, of course, Dirk is just working. But he kind of strikes up this odd friendship with Felix. It's definitely, I mean, the first time they meet, I was like, oh, Felix, I think I know. I think I know what you're up to. Like I think Felix is kind of into Dirk. And
you were picking up those signals from Felix.
I was picking up those vibes for sure from Felix. And Felix is a musician. That's what he's studying at school. And so Dirk, who kind of just is self-described and how others describe him throughout the book, especially the earlier part of the book, is that he's kind of dull. And by dull, not like he's boring, but he is kind of boring, I think, too, at some of those early points. But that he's kind of dumb. But he's really not. He's not necessarily somebody that I think is a reliable protagonist in terms of his thoughts of himself, how he perceives himself, because it becomes clear through characters like Felix and other characters throughout the book that he's I think a lot more kind of I don't know, intriguing and attractive and intelligent than what he kind of gives himself credit for. But at the end of the summer, Dirk ends up he's not employed by this family anymore. He has to figure something else out. And so he ends up going to work for like a paper miller. They're the Pfeiffer family, and he's married to a woman named Nosteron, and she's from Persia. And Dirk is immediately kind of attracted to her and intrigued by her. She's like, she makes herself kind of scarce. She kind of covers her face in veils a lot. So like there's a good chunk of the time that he's living there and he doesn't even know what she fully looks like, but he's attracted to her. And so her husband ends up having to go on this, I guess, annual journey that he does for his business. And he leaves Dirk kind of in her care her in Dirk's care because she sleepwalks and she has to kind of be watched at all times, and so that she doesn't hurt herself or get lost or anything like that. And so that's Dirk's job, is he's got to kind of keep an eye out for her. He only has one eye, but anyway, so he does, and he's worried about her because she does sleepwalk, and at one point she gets out of the house and he ends up, through a bunch of kind of random circumstances, he ends up meeting Felix again. Felix had kind of gone back to school, but somehow ends up in the same town that Dirk's now living in. And Felix introduces Dirk to this Dr. Mesmer, who he thinks might help Nosteron with her sleepwalking and why she sleepwalks, because she doesn't really know. She feels like she's looking for something, but she doesn't know what she's looking for. So that the most long-winded.
How about that passage?
Well, we'll cut a lot of that, I'm sure. But in any case, Dr. Mesmer puts her into kind of a trance, and when she comes out of it, he kind of explains to her, like, okay, this is what you described to me when you were out and under. This is Dr. Mesmer talking to Frau Pfeiffer, or Nosteron.
If I understand you correctly, you told me that when you walk forward in your sleep, you are trying to walk backward. I don't comprehend you, said Frau Pfeiffer, humbly, even pitiably. Backward to some time in the past, some place, some garden, some walled garden in a place called, I think, something like Bandar. Bandari Bushir, she whispered. She held the pads of 8 fingers and the nails of her thumbs at her lips as if to guard any other words from escaping. You left a child there, among the roses in the fountains, among the shrieking peacocks and other luminous birds. You walk at night to try to return to collect the child, to rescue her. You did not mean to leave her behind when you left with, was it, I think, merchants from the Low Countries, from Holland, Amsterdam, because of a family matter? And there you met your current husband. His voice was neutral, without scorn or blame. You could see the Persian Gulf. You could smell the salt in the air. There was a tiled dome on some ecclesiastical building, a mosque or a shrine that rose to the east, like the blue veined breast of a sleeping mother. You could see it above the top of the stone wall. There was a pomegranate tree. There was a walnut tree. Someone used to tell you that the key to your life would be found in a walnut. You would collect the walnuts as they fell, but you hadn't the strength to open them by hand, and there was no brick or mallet or stone with which to strike them. I don't know who used to tell you that. I don't know much more, nor if I have said this very accurately at all. I am somewhat out of practice. So this is what Mesmer describes to Nostron as her vision while she was under his trance. And later on, Dirk ends up going back to Mesmer by himself because he wants to try to find a solution to this to help Nostron. And so this is a few pages later. So this is Dirk speaking. I think the reason that Nostron is a poor mother to her sons is that she left her daughter behind when she sailed from Persia. She's distracted with grief. Surely something can be done about that. The child is dead. How do you know that? The doctor sighed and patted his heart as if cucumbers had featured in the breakfast menu. Don't you see? The child in the garden is Nostron herself, is Frau Pfeiffer as a girl. Whoever can give an adult a key to that lost garden. The child in that garden is gone. She cannot be rescued. She cannot be found. So they continue talking, and then later on the same page, Dirk swallowed. She asked me to find the key. We all have our secret alphabets, private codes of gesture and symbol. Perhaps there was an actual walnut tree in the garden of her youth. Who knows? All children want to know the hidden meaning of the world until they grow up and resign themselves to it being unknowable. Every closed walnut that fell at her feet in that cherished past held, perhaps, more possibility than anything that has happened since. I can't say.
The reason why I read that is because I felt like that was when I first started getting this inkling of this is about lost childhoods. If you look at Dirk as a character, he really literally has a lost childhood. I mean, he really was raised by people that he didn't call mom and dad. And he was, there was an attempted murder when he was a child, and he had to kind of grow up at that point and fend for himself. And now he encounters this woman who's sleepwalking every night, trying to get back to this garden she has no chance of ever getting back to, trying to find a walnut that never really existed in the first place, that holds the key to her childhood. And it's kind of this hopeless venture for her. This is also a mild spoiler, but again, not super far into the book. It's for her that Dirk uses the knife that he left the Black Forest with and uses the staff that he left the Black Forest with and carves the Nutcracker. He carves it for Nosteron as this kind of symbol of like, you have this Nutcracker and it can hopefully crack this nut of your childhood. Like, I want to help you. For reasons I won't explain, she doesn't end up keeping it. He keeps it. It
He
goes
keeps
with
the
him.
Nutcracker.
He keeps the Nutcracker all along his journey until the very end of the book. And the person who gets that Nutcracker is Clara from the Nutcracker Ballet, the Nutcracker story.
Obviously, this Nutcracker item, like, it's a craft of his, and that it probably does somehow symbolize, trying to find some sense of beauty in hardship too, right? Like, and that is your tool to help you overcome. So I actually really like that image, even though it is really painful. Like, it's really sad actually to think about this poor woman and that the grief
Yeah.
of. Did you
Yeah.
connect with any of these characters, or did they feel too mythical and too distant to really like have a connection with?
I think I connected with the overall idea of thinking back to your child self and not being able to get to that person anymore. I didn't really connect with any particular character, but I just connected to this idea more than anything else of this idea of a lost childhood. I feel like every book I read now, like if there's kids in it or like a parental figure, I'm automatically like looking at it in the context of my own experience with motherhood and
Oh yeah.
and certainly looking at my own child and watching him grow and wanting to make things special for him, but also like even looking at him and the way he plays and like there's a part of myself that used to play like that and I can't reach her. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
Like
mhm.
I play with him, but it's so friggin' boring. Like I love playing with him, but I don't have the joy in the actual playing. If
Mhm.
anything, I'm like enjoying his joy. But
Yeah.
like I remember like being able to create these stories in my head and act them out with dolls and figures or even act them out myself with, like make believe
Mhm.
and how that's so accessible to him and it's not accessible to me. But it once really was. It was like such a huge part of my own childhood playing experience, like was making up worlds and acting out what I would do in them. That's so lost to me now.
Mhm. I know, I feel like it's a little part like preoccupation, right? Like, and I know you said it like partly as a joke, but and I feel guilty saying it too, but there is truth to it that not every time you play with your kids is going to be magical, right? Like, there's
No.
magical moments and there's glimmers, but sometimes you're just like, my gosh, like I wish you were just playing on your own because I need to do X, Y, and Z. But yet when you're a kid, it's like when you're not playing, all you want to do is be playing again. You want to be
Mhm.
in that make-believe world. You're thinking about different ways to shape it. Like, part of your brain is always existing in those imaginary worlds, because they're so important to you. And I think probably part of it is because you have control over those worlds. And I think about this a lot with my kids. Like, they have so little agency, right? Like,
Mm.
just everything they eat and do, their schedules, their activity, like, it's so prescribed by us that when they do enter those worlds, they're in charge, right? Like, that must be so liberating and so empowering for them.
This is a much shorter passage, don't worry. This is Dirk, and this is as the two little boys that are Nostron's sons. They're older now, and he's finally leaving them. And he is thinking, and he says, "Is it only in childhood that we are capable of taking in the whole world? What does it do to us that we briefly have that privilege? And then what harm when the fund of novelty in human experience runs dry?" And I don't know, like I
Mm,
just feel like that kind of is, somewhat what we're talking about. Like this idea of like this curiosity, it's all possible.
mm,
Magic is possible. And then at some point, it's not anymore. We don't have
mm,
access to it in a way that we once did. By the end of the novel, Drosselmeyer, Dirk, has become a toy maker. That's what he's ended up doing with his life. He travels the world, sees so much, and it all kind of comes back. And he ultimately becomes this toy maker. And it's like, again, I think speaking to the idea of lost childhoods, like he's making these small toys. It's like this way to reclaim his own lost childhood
mm.
by making the playthings, the vessels with which children can live out their fantasies of what life is really like.
What is the
So
name of the theme? Like, what was Michael Jackson's ranch called? Everland,
Neverland. Yeah,
Neverland.
Neverland Ranch. Yeah, which is
It's the
like from Peter
same image.
Pan. Yeah, it's the same idea. By the time Dirk gets to, encounter Clara as this now youngest, he goes kind of through like three different generations of kids. He starts off with the Pfeiffers and their two sons, and he spends a lot of time with those boys. And at first he's like, I don't know how to be with kids. Like, I'm not good at this. Like, why are you like leaving their care to me? turns out, like, again, unreliable narrator. He is actually great with kids. And like when we come to those kids as adults, like they actually say to him, like, hey, you let us do things and like create worlds. And it was, you made our childhood magical type thing. But so he has the Pfeiffer kids. And then later on, his friend Felix has two sons. And he ends up becoming their godfather, and they grow up. And then it's one of those sons who is now the father of Fritz and Clara, who are the children of the kind of Nutcracker story. And so he's now the old godfather who has been like, making all these toys. And he also does, works with clocks. And then he ends up incorporating that into his toy making. And the Nutcracker itself is enchanted. There is real magic in this book that Dirk encounters first in the Black Forest, and it kind of follows him throughout. And it really kind of culminates in this like magical Christmas Eve night where there's this kind of battle between the toys and the mice. And on one hand, it's not real, and then on another hand, it's totally real.
Right.
And I think that's the climax of the book. And it really, once you get to that part, you're like, oh, I totally understand everything that he did, every person that he encountered, every experience that he had is all just like adding up and leading to this.
And then it's weaving right in with the story that's familiar, like the fairy tale that people know. And so it's time for me to ask you a very important question. For you, Sarah, is Hiddensee by Gregory Maguire a could-read book, a should-read book, or a must-read book, in your opinion?
All right. So I think if we're talking about a broad audience here, it's a could read, because this is not going to appeal to everybody. It won't. Obviously, I suppose if you're going to read the book, maybe you have some interest in folk tales and fairy tales. But I think if you were just like, I just want to check this book out, but I'm not really into that, it's not going to work for you. So that's why it's a good read. But I do think if you're someone who, had a relationship with a lot of fairy tales when you were a child, loved the Brothers Grimm and some of their kind of messed up stories of childhood, then this would be a should read for that crowd, which is a much smaller crowd, I feel like. So I feel like could read for our broad audience, should read for our kind of more niche fairy tale loving audience. So I'm kind of doing a twofer with that one.
It's been so nice to talk to you about this book. Thank you so much for illuminating this book for me and for chatting with me about all of your preparations for Christmas. And I'm looking forward to our next episode where we're going to actually talk about some books that we both read in 2023.
I can't wait.
Bye.
Bye.